Today, we're going to be talking about how to stop beating your... Hello, everyone, and God bless. This is Father Mike, with a other episode of Living Orthodox. And today we're going to be talking about a very important discussion. It comes up frequently wherever you go online. And today we are going to be talking about why you need to stop abusing yourself and the beginning basis of how you can start developing the mindset to do it. That said, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more content. As just a very quick update, my wife is just a couple weeks away from giving birth to our daughter, so please keep her in your prayers. Our third child, and of course my wife. And my father is making a really, quite frankly, unexpected recovery. So thank you everyone for your prayers. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the GoFundMe. I still have not been able to find work here in Lethbridge. It's notoriously difficult to find jobs here, and especially in my case right now. So just please keep me in your prayers. If you're interested in supporting us, the link to the GoFundMe is in the description. With that said, let's get into the content of today's discussion.
That's pretty important.
That's right. Guys, this is a common problem, right? We see this problem popping up all over the place. With the internet, we now have accessibility to things that we did not have access to before. We have, unfortunately, an incredibly sexualized culture that has found a way to commercialize what should be reserved between a man and a woman in a God-loving marriage, and to turn it into something profane and, of course, marketable, because there was that old saying for the longest time that sex sells. And we see the evidence of this, of course, in how things are marketed to men and women. Everything's kind of based off of this dichotomy of desire, an economy of desire, right? And how this interplays. Ultimately, this will culminate in difficulties with being able to parse this out, with being able to maintain the chastity of the eyes, which is really the first step to overcoming anything related to the sins of the flesh, is to gain custody over your eyes, to consciously make the effort to turn them from things. Before I go much further, guys, I know so many of you just want that kind of piece of wisdom that's going to somehow click the puzzle for you and just magically make you lose your desire for this stuff. I see people always complain, well, you didn't touch on this, or I feel like it could have been more on this or that. I've had that related to this topic in the past. Bad news. No matter what I say, not everyone is going to be able to agree with it or necessarily apply it. You have to work on this. You can only do so much in a 15-minute YouTube video. The key thing is to understand what self-abuse will entail, what it leads to, and basic tricks to start overcoming that mindset. Now, a lot of the time when we think of free will, we assume that this means that we should just freely be able to will ourselves in any direction that we want. Now, while human will is free, it is not necessarily unconstrained, right? You know, we have to look at the body, and let's just be quick. You can't take on this Cartesian dualism where you're a soul trapped in a body. It's a common thing that it shows up all over the place in our Western society. We are ensouled bodies or an embodied soul, however you want to word it. Human beings as a whole are composite this way. We have a relatively immaterial soul to a relatively material body. And our nervous system, you know, our central nervous system, our brain, everything, our eyes, all of this is a way in which our soul interacts with the world, and of course in which the world interacts with our souls, right? What good would fasting be if the body had no influence on the soul regarding its habits, right? What good would any of this be? What good would be prostrations? What would be the point of God even making a physical world if there was going to just be this sharp cutoff? So there is a really good book. And again, not everything needs to be out of a monastery to be recommended. That could be beneficial. This isn't like the be-all, end-all text by any means, but there's a really good book by a psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Anna Lemke. And it's not an excuse to push drugs or medicate. I don't want to hear this pharmakeia nonsense in the comments. Pay attention to what is being said. There is some very good accounts in this book called Dopamine Nation by Dr. Anna Lemke, and it gives us an idea of how these addictions work their way into our lives and a healthy approach to dealing with them, because not every psychiatrist, believe it or not, guys, wants to push pills. They are sometimes interested in getting you to do things to simply change the behaviors you're stuck in. And of course, you're going to get people in all sorts of walks of life, and including the fields that I study in, who try to say that free will doesn't exist. That's just quite frankly nonsense. You can't, you can't look into the brain and see a thought. You can only correlate regions of a brain and of the nervous system with thoughts that are occurring in relation to anatomical function. It gives us a window into what's happening. It doesn't show us exactly what is happening, right? You still can't say that love can just be reduced to oxytocin release. It is something far more profound than that. That said, lust is incredibly not profound. It is a very lower faculty. It is just the base desire to possess that which is not yours, to possess another for your own benefit. There is an account in this book of an Eastern European man who fell into a severe addiction regarding the sins of the flesh, to the point where it cost him his marriage. It got out of control, and he was an elderly man still struggling with sexual addiction. We have to understand that addiction is a behavior that usually is the response to something. That being said, it is something that will degrade at us with time. The very definition of mental health is having your mind in, kind of being in the present moment, with being able to reconcile with reality. Ultimately, the main factor that leads more men than ever, and women too, actually, down into this temptation, into masturbation and pornography, is disconnection. You heard me, it's disconnection. Human beings are relational, right? When we look at what the church is a body. We see this illustration throughout the entirety of the New Testament. And we have to understand that as a result, we are not really made by God to necessarily be independent. Now, that doesn't mean that's the case for everyone. Some people are called to monasticism. I got bad news, guys. Just struggling with self-abuse and with looking at women and not being able to find a girlfriend does not mean you are necessarily called to monasticism. You can't just run away from your sins, because I promise you, if you go into the monastery with that mindset, you will have the fight of your life, and you might not walk out of that one in one piece. It is disconnection, right? It's this disconnection and dehumanization, this economization or commoditization of another human being, right? You remove the person's the person from what you're seeing on the screen, and this person just becomes an object of desire. That's the first step. And as a result of that, you become disconnected from yourself, because human beings no longer are interacting in a way that is normal for us, the way God designed us. It's this false interaction with a release and a stimulus designed for a procreative act happening through an intermediary like a screen, right? And I've mentioned it before, but chapter 1 of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules to Life has a really good kind of animal kingdom illustration, and that's what happens when male lobsters lose to a stronger, superior male lobster and see that he gets the mates. It actually shrinks down his brain. Well, funny fact, there is studies that are coming out that show that there are negative impacts, of course, on our brain, on our nervous system, that occur in relation to visual intake and stimulation of pornography, and of course, to sexual release. You do not have oxytocin present. You don't have the other feedbacks present from being with a loving wife, or if you're a woman, a loving husband. And as a result, there is kind of this cutoff where you go, I'm not fulfilled. You don't get that same serotonergic response, that same well-being. Instead, a lot of people, after abusing themselves, report feeling kind of gross or off, right? Ultimately, it is the fact that when we disconnect, we fall into despair, right? We're alone, we're lonely. Selfish desire and bottomless want is what leads to despair. And we live in a society with bottomless scrolling options when it comes to YouTube Shorts, Instagram, TikTok. It almost seems endless. The problem is that actually our brains are wired to seek things that are salient and things that are novel. And so when we see a lot of novel stimulus that elicits a response that can create a goal or orient us towards a goal, especially as men. We're very susceptible to this. We have very active mesolimbic pathways, and that is an incredibly important system to the dopaminergic system in the brain. And what happens is a lot of people think, oh, dopamine is just a feel-good drug. No, actually, it's not a drug. It's a neurotransmitter. And this is something that God created. It's incredibly beautiful, but it can be abused. It can fall and be corrupted, right, by sin. Pay close attention. When we fix our eyes on something, there's always going to be a bit of dopamine, like when we're reading a book, when we're studying, when we see someone beautiful, when we see the face of our wife, or maybe ladies, if you've got a nice handsome husband, the face of your husband, and there's that kind of little rush, that desire to look. And dopamine can help direct our gaze towards an object of desire or towards a goal. This is why a lot of the time when men struggle with self-abuse and with looking at this stuff online, they actually lose motivation. Because what happens is the more you spike your dopamine in response to something, to an objective or an object that you desire, it doesn't come back down to baseline. You've now set an expectation that nudity, that these depraved, immoral acts, and this kind of stimulation and release should be more readily available. And that sets a lower ceiling. So every time you get that peak at the trough, and it starts to dip down, your dopamine sinks below baseline and it gets further and further and further down. And soon all you can do is sit there thinking about some woman you lusted after in public or an image you see online, and then you find yourself trapped. Like I've read surveys and studies that said there are men who will sometimes get stuck in a rut, just looking at this stuff for hours and hours on end. And they start to despair naturally. They feel completely trapped and ensnared to this beast. Despair disables our connection as a result, though. We start to feel worthless. We start to close off. And the problem with this is that it actually blocks love. Love is ultimately the willing the good of another. Love is our ability to reach beyond ourselves and desire to give ourselves without anything expected in return to someone else. That is the definition of love, is to will the good of the other. And true love, the highest form of love, agape, is that self-sacrificing love, that love that demands no price. But the problem is that despair blocks it, because there is a price. There's the price of your comfort. There's the price of your selfish wants, right? The removal of one's self-driven desires for comfort and ease is what we have to work on. We have to start saying, okay, where am I taking the shortcuts? And we have to deny these things. It's okay to sleep on the floor once in a while and engage in a little bit of asceticism. Get up early before the sun rises and go for a run. Go to the gym. Find something to work on. Get up early and journal. Read something beneficial. Set out a plan for the day. Give yourself purpose. A lot of the time what is absent is purpose, and as a result, men will seek a goal, and sometimes then that goal becomes disoriented towards a natural desire to have a loving, committed relationship, to have connection with another human being, to be able to, as a result of that connection, have progeny that we can in turn connect with and expand our love to. That's the beauty of this in marriage, is that this just grows. My wife and I are on to our third child now, and this is just something that increases our capacity for love. You have to replace these short-term fixes with something that is long-term, with a sustainable goal. And you have to have this self-giving love for the sake of doing what is right. Okay, it can't be with a price in mind. It can't be that I'm going to do this thing with this church to get this girl's attention so that she'll go out with me. You have to, if you're going to say volunteer with your church to help out with cleanup or whatever, it has to be solely for, this is how I can give my love to God. This is how I can show love to my neighbor, to my brother, to my sister. The rest will fall into place. You have to love to do the good for the sake of good, for the sake of Christ ultimately, for the sake of the Lord, who from every good and perfect gift flows. This is what we see at the end of the liturgy when the priest does the prayer behind the ambon. We give thanks to thee, the Father of lights, right? And we even say how every good and perfect gift comes from above, from him. Good cannot be isolated in of itself, okay? Good has never been something isolatory or simply just merely personal, just as sin isn't personal. St. Silouan the Athonite points out that sin has this metaphysical effect, this ripple throughout the cosmos. I mean, think about it. We were formed from the dust of the earth, but we are the ones who sin, and as a result, the whole of creation falls out of alignment with the Creator. Why is that? Right? Because we're not just disconnected. We're not isolated beings, right? We're supposed to offer our lives to God, and when He places us in dominion, in a place where we can offer it all to Him, and we say no, and we retract that, it ends up killing us because we disconnect ourselves from the source of good, from the source of love, the source of life. Good cannot be isolated in of itself. When we look at something beautiful, it is never something just in isolation, right? God is all good, and this is why He created our universe, because He is good, because He is such a loving God that this love is not just reserved for Himself, but for His creatures. It reflects His love, which is perfect in of Himself, but it is energized in creation, meaning that love cannot be acted within itself. God doesn't just reserve His love for Himself, He gives it to all of us freely. One cannot be good in a vacuum. One cannot love in a vacuum. And the problem is with pornography and masturbation, it creates an echo chamber. It's this endless soul-sucking vacuum. You don't need me to sit here and tell you that masturbation is bad, that sex addiction is bad. You know this deep inside. It is bad. What's worse is falling into despair and allowing it to keep you in that cycle of abuse and despair, to disconnect from your parents, to disconnect from your friends, from your family, from your community. You have to have these connections. You have to keep yourself busy. You have to make yourself a man of service. Because when you start focusing on serving others and less on yourself, that desire for self-release and for self-pleasure will begin to fall away. It won't be easy. You might need to use something like Covenant Eyes. You might need an accountability partner. You'll find someone who you can trust to help you stay accountable. Because ultimately, the only thing, the big secret to defeating the sin is consistency. You have to pray. Yes. You have to go to church and receive the sacraments. Yes, that is the best way. But the other side of it, you have to have discipline. And that means doing the things you don't want to do when you really need to do them. It is so easy to just go, I'm gonna quit tomorrow. Let me go on to sin.com. No, you're gonna quit today. Right? I lost over 80 pounds quitting overeating in one day. Now, it doesn't mean that I lost the weight in one day. I had to make that decision, though, over and over again every single day until it became the way I live. It's the same for this. You have to make the decision to serve God and not yourself, to not deprive your future wife of the love you should be giving her, nor your current wife. If you're married and you're struggling with this addiction, men, you have to conquer this. This is not something you want to spread to your children. And believe me, this spiritual influence is so subtle. I have talked to people where children have had weird temptations towards sexual things. Nobody harmed them. Nobody said anything to them. But it turns out the dad was struggling with something pretty bad in the background. It bleeds forward. It always does. Sin is, as St. Silouan said, never an isolated event. But neither can be love. So work, my brothers, really hard on cultivating that spirit of love, that desire to serve. Our Christ served. He served. So should we. God bless you all. Have a wonderful night. I'll catch you in the next one.